Good afternoon, everybody. This is Danny Jenkins, CEO of ThreatLocker, and Michael Jenkins, CTO of ThreatLocker. I appreciate everyone joining us today, and thank you to Michael for assisting me on presenting the ThreatLocker live demo. The purpose of this webinar is twofold. One is to do an up-to-date live demo of some of the features, and we're going to touch on some of the newer features that have been released over the last few weeks, followed by a bit of extra time on extra policies and extra steps we can take to secure Windows 7. Above and beyond what we would normally do. So to start with, I'm just going to share my screen. And Michael, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, can see your screen.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions throughout the webinar, you can just raise your hands and Michael will let you and ask those questions, or if you don't wish to raise your hand, you can just type the question into the questions and answers, and we'll do our best to answer it. If there's too many questions or it's taking too long, we'll promise if we don't answer during the webinar, we will get back to you afterwards. So first of all, I'd just like to talk a little bit about ThreatLocker, and for those who aren't existing customers, what ThreatLocker does and why we do it. So ThreatLocker has taken a zero trust approach to endpoint security. So what that means is, unlike traditional threat detection and systems, ThreatLocker doesn't look for bad stuff. We don't go and track bad things or isolate bad patterns. What we do instead is look at what should be running and block everything else. And then once an application is running, control what that application can do. So it's really about creating policies to reduce your surface area of attack. Most people use 5 to 10 applications on their computer on a day-to-day basis, yet we tend to have this approach of allowing everything. So by blocking anything that isn't explicitly trusted, not only are we reducing the risk of shadow IT, software that's going to slow down our systems and just pop up toolbars and things like that, we're also reducing the risk and putting really a stop to things like ransomware or other malicious software. In addition to controlling what can run, we also want to be able to control what that application can do. So for example, Microsoft Office should be able to run, PowerShell should be able to run. Both of those are legitimate applications that are on the whitelist, but we want to be able to stop applications like Office or Adobe Reader or Internet Explorer calling backend applications that can be used to attack us, like PowerShell, and then even isolate those backend applications so they can't access our files or our data or things like that. So what I'd like to do and what I'm going to do is just kind of show everyone the interface and show how easy ThreatLocker is to deploy and manage. Traditionally, whitelisting has always been very, very cumbersome and difficult to manage. And one of the things we've really done at ThreatLocker is take a lot of effort and a lot of resources into making sure that the customer and the managed service provider experience for whitelisting is very, very easy. So as a managed service provider, when you first sign up for ThreatLocker, you'll receive a login credentials for our portal, and you'll be able to log into the portal and see all of your clients in one place. You can very simply switch between clients by clicking the Manage button, create new clients here, or if you're using one of the integrations to something like one of our scripts with LabTech or Kaseya or SolarWinds or Synchro or any of the RMM systems, you don't even have to create the organizations. It will do it automatically for you using one of our deployment scripts. The first stage in getting the ThreatLocker running is really deploying the agent. So to get started, you can simply go to the computers page and click Install New Computer, or you can use the RMM script and push it out through the RMM. It takes about 30 seconds to install ThreatLocker. And once it's installed, the computers are going to show up on the computers page. Initially, everything is going to be in a monitor-only mode. So you don't have to worry about pushing this agent out and suddenly your network having lots of issues and your customers calling you saying, I can't open Office and I can't open this. We're just going to start monitoring and we'll start learning from your environment. Within a couple of hours, within a couple of minutes of installing, we're going to start to log every application that's opened on your system, every DLL, every script file, every exe. It's going to be logged in the audit here in real time. So at any point in time, you can go into the audit and you can search for an application. Apparently Chrome's been open since yesterday. And you can say, show me.
You wrote chrome.exe or .chrome.
Thank you. So you can search for every time an application's been opened, who opened it, what computer, what process opened it, what the cert is, what the hash is, even the serial number of the hard drive. And this is going to be logged in real time. So, and this is important for two reasons. One is knowing what's running is the first step in trying to configure your whitelisting environment and your zero trust environment. In addition to this, we're also going to catalog everything that's on your hard drive. So any applications that are installed, we're going to upload a list of those files and those hashes, and we're going to be able to build policies from them. So within a few hours of installing, you'll be able to go into our policies page and you'll see that we create policies for all of the software we found on your computer. Now, the first part of this is the applications that we know what are. So if you're running Microsoft Office, if you're running QuickBooks, if you're running Google Chrome, we're going to have predefined what we call application definitions for those. And we're going to create policies using those predefined policies to automatically allow that software to run. Now, this is really important because anyone who's tried to use a zero trust approach before when it comes to application, things like application whitelisting, knows that this is an absolute nightmare to manage. Trying to figure out how to, first of all, cataloging the software, but then dealing with the fact that applications constantly are updating, Office is updating, Windows are updating. Today is Patch Tuesday. In an hour's time, our application team are going to get their heads down and they're going to start installing probably the 20 to 30,000 unique hashes that Microsoft are going to push out. So by being able to match applications and Windows files to known apps, it means not only are we verifying that those apps are what they say they are, but we're also making sure that if there's a new version of that application, we're going to take care of making sure the whitelisted is updated and that new application is going to run in the background. So you don't have to worry about the management overhead that's traditionally associated with whitelisting because we're taking care of all those application updates for you. We're then inevitably going to find some software that we don't know what is. So if you're running some custom ERP system or custom payroll software, or for example, on here I have FreeCAD, and we do not know what that application is, but we're going to profile it for you anyway. We're going to build definitions on the fly. So for example, here, FreeCAD has 540 files, none of which are signed. We've cataloged all that for you and we've created the policy for you, so you don't have to worry about that. The next stage in this is really locking down your environment. So what we typically do is a week after that, we let it learn for a week. Unless you're in the middle of a ransomware attack or something, it's a good idea to let it learn for a week. At the end of that week, you can come into the audit here and you can say, show me everything that would be denied if I was to turn this on today. And we can very easily see a quick list. You can see that I've now put my computer into monitor only, and I can see, oh, there's 3 things that would be denied. And in this case, two of them are the same. So it's putty in the downloads folder. And the reason that hasn't been permitted is we don't profile the downloads or the documents folder by default. And there's a ring fencing policy that would be hit. So we can see here that PowerShell tried to go out to Google, and that would have been denied because we have a ring fencing policy that stops PowerShell going to Google. And I'll talk more about ring fencing in a moment. We can create any exceptions we need to make sure that this isn't going to be denied. So if we normally have a handful of files we have to deal with. So I could create a policy to allow PowerShell to go to Google if I want, or I can simply permit it if it's an application that's being blocked from here. And then the next stage is once you're happy, there's nothing that's going to be denied that you don't want to get denied. You can simply go into the computers page, select all the computers, turn off monitor only, and you can do it in a group as well, and click deploy policies. It's worth noting if you are a managed service provider and you do look after 70 or 80 businesses, you can switch between accounts and do these same searches, or you can do a unified search across all of your clients and do this in one go, so you don't have to keep switching backward and forward. And for the MSP customers out there, that is a new feature if you haven't seen that before. So this extra checkbox to show all your child organizations is very valuable. Now that you're locked down, nothing is going to be able to run that isn't explicitly trusted. So if there isn't a policy for it already, and someone downloads a new application from the internet, someone opens a Word document and it goes off and gets a piece of ransomware or a batch file or a script file and tries to run that, if somebody exploits your computer using Eternal Blue or the next equivalent of Eternal Blue vulnerability and tries to execute some software, that software is going to be blocked. Whether it's good or bad, if it's not on your list of trusted applications, it's not going to be allowed. That leads to the next point of what happens from a workflow point of view. How do users, what is the user experience when they're trying to run new software? So if something does try to run, whether it be at the kernel level or the user level, it's going to be blocked. The user, if logged in as a user, is going to receive a notification saying, oh, apparently I didn't wait long enough, or click deploy policies. Give it a second.
Always the problem. We're always impatient.
Yeah.
60 seconds.
So the application is going to be blocked, and the user is going to receive a pop-up saying what was blocked. And if you, as the IT administrator, are on the computer, you can simply say my administrator is present and approve it there, or the user can just hit request permission. It's worth noting as well, for the managed service providers, you can brand this pop-up with your own logo and your own brand as well. When somebody requests permission, it's going to create a ticket in your PSA. It's going to send an email to you, send a text message, and the text message is a new feature. And you can click on a link in that message to approve it straight away. Or I can just go into the approval center here, look a list of my approvals, and I can approve it immediately from here. I get the options of who do I want to approve it for. So I can say, okay, I want to approve this for every computer in this group, for the entire organization, for just this computer. And if we know what the application is, we're going to tell you here, okay, we know what this is. It matches one of our built-in definitions. So we say, we recognize PuTTY. So if there's a new version of PuTTY, that's going to be allowed. But it also means we're going to know what all the dependencies are. So PuTTY is hardly a huge application, but there are about 14 different DLLs and PuTTY-gen and things that combine with it. So you can permit all of that in one go without having to request each file. So I can just hit permit here. Within 60 seconds, the user is going to be able to open that. And what it did in the background is it created a policy to allow PuTTY for me. Now, these policies, they run like firewall policies. So they run in order, top to bottom. They can be applied at the MSP level. They can be applied at the organization, the individual computer, or the computer group level. And you can apply them to certain users. You can set them to expire. You can even say it can only run from certain disk types or things like that. So there's a lot of options here. And as you can see, the user can open PuTTY very, very quickly. Now, of course, not everything is as simple as PuTTY, and not everything is one of our built-in applications. We don't know what every piece of software is. If you have a custom ERP or custom software, or that we don't have in our database, and you're trying to install that, even with that really simple approval process, it could still be very tedious if you keep having to hit approve for 500 files. If there's 500 files, we take that FreeCAD as an example. Now that was cataloged during the initial baseline, but let's say we're trying to install this later on. There's 540 files there. None of those files were signed. So if we're trying to permit that, that's going to be very difficult, because it leaves us with one or two options with the traditional whitelisting sense. One is to permit the entire directory, which is just a bad idea. The other one is to go through each file one at a time and permit it, which is going to take a long time. So what we did is we came up with this concept of learning mode, or profiling mode, where you can run an installation and you can track changes to your system during that installation. You can build your own lists of definitions based on the changes. You can do this from the tray here. So you can just turn on this profiling mode for those installed files. If the application is already installed and you're just trying to track what's running as well, you can also do executed files. You can click request permission and start it from the approval center. You can schedule a maintenance period on a server or something if you're doing a custom app update. And you can just put your credentials in here. And that's going to be permitted. You can see here, we do know what Notepad++ is, but I'm going to say it doesn't matter. I'm going to create a custom app and say track all the changes for me. And I can just run through that installation. So when I hit permit, you can see it started the learning profiling mode at the moment. And we can run through the installation. And at the end of the installation, we can just simply click profiling mode, and it's tracked all of the changes to our system. It's gone off and created the policy for me. So now everyone in this group can run, I thought I said this group. Did I say entire organization? Or maybe I said don't. Let me just check, because I was demonstrating something. I have a computer in this group. Oh, there you go. It's there. So it's created that policy for me. Normally it creates it at the top, but apparently not. It's created that policy for me, and it's created the application definition for me as well.
It's worth mentioning as well to people, because obviously Danny's just permitted that for the entire group. You don't have to do this for every computer. You've done it once. every other computer in that group or the organization, whatever level you're putting it on, will now be able to run that installer and install this program without having to worry about it being blocked in the first time.
Okay. And even if they're outside of that group, if you're an MSP and you've created the definition, you can make that public. So it's not necessarily permitted, but it can, the package is already there. So when it pops up, you don't have to go through the installation mode for your clients as well. So I can see here all of the files that were created during the install. It's created all the rules for me, so I didn't have to worry about it. It was only 22 rules, not the 500, but I didn't really want to sit through an hour-long installation of FreeCAD today. Now, from a whitelisting point of view, you can see that this is really easy to get deployed, get locked down, and then even approve things when they need to be approved. And in reality, most organizations that have over 1,000 seats are spending less than 2 hours a month managing this. Maybe during the first month, there might be a few extra things, but generally the approval process is so quick, and once you've got the rules in place, there really shouldn't be much to do in it. So you're getting those enterprise zero trust tools, but you're getting it without building a massive team. And whitelisting has always been one of those technologies that's been very useful for big organizations, the big banks, the Department of Defense, where they literally have an army of people to manage it. But for smaller organizations or managed service providers, it's always been out of reach. So they've been forced to rely on threat detection technologies and keep adding different threat detection technologies and failed to, and in the hope it will solve their problem, and it hasn't. Whereas now we've made that application whitelisting approach as accessible to not just the Department of Defense, but also other businesses. The next stage of this is where we're going to talk about ring fencing. Whitelisting is great at controlling what can and can't run. It is the gold standard when it comes to blocking malicious software. It's not a replacement to an antivirus in that it will not tell you what's good and bad. It will tell you we know what something is, but it does actually stop anything from running regardless. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't stop someone using tools built into your operating system to attack you. For example, 2 months ago, Microsoft released a patch for Internet Explorer. It's solved a security vulnerability that allowed an attacker to launch a PowerShell command from Internet Explorer, download a payload, upload data, encrypt files without a single click. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, well, how can we control these attackers and stop them living off the land and attacking us through other means? So what we did is we came up with this concept of ring fencing. The idea with ring fencing is once an application is running, we essentially build a fence around it or fences around it, and we define what can talk to what files can be accessed and things like that. So as an example, I have a policy here to ring fence Office, which is one of our suggested policies. You can easily add any suggested policies from here. As we create new ones, we'll put them in here, and we'll talk about the Windows 7 lockdown ones later on. And you can just add them there. I've turned this one off just so I can demonstrate an example of where an attacker could get access to you. So I have a Microsoft Word document here. And in this Word document, there's a link to what appears to be Google. But when I click on it, it fires up PowerShell. I could potentially pipe in a command there, upload data, download files, download a payload, attack your system in ways that doesn't even files or various other things. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, well, how can we stop that? So the first thing we want to do is we want to take our front-end applications, take our applications that interact with either the users or the internet browsers and things like that, where data can be brought into our system, because users receive Word documents, Excel files, they open web pages, and these are all areas of surface area of attack. And we want to try and squish that down as much as we can. And the whitelisting stops it running things, but it doesn't stop it running things that are on the whitelist. So we can create policies like this ring fencing policy, where we can say, okay, I'm going to permit Microsoft Office, but I'm going to ring fence it. And I want to control, first of all, how it can interact with other applications. So I can say block interaction with certain applications. So block PowerShell, command prompt, register, run DLL, all those dangerous applications. Or I can say on the other end, only permit with certain applications. Again, if it's not on the whitelist, it can't run anyway, but these are the things that are on the whitelist we want to control. What this allows me to do is, by simply turning on that policy, Office can still function, PowerShell can still function, so I can still open PowerShell, I can still open Office. But if I do receive a document that somehow tries to use one of my tools against me and click on that document, that will not be able to execute PowerShell. And you'll see here in the audit and we like to log lots of data, that was ring fenced, and we can see the policy that ring fenced it straight from there. So that's one part. And the policies we really try and focus on here is getting those front end apps where users are taking in external data, where they're opening documents or accessing websites and things like that, and making sure they cannot call our back end administration apps that could be used to cause damage. The next part of that, though, is really taking those back-end apps and making sure they can't upload data, they can't download payloads, and they can't access our files, because far too often, all these really powerful administration tools that are on our system have unfettered access to anything they want. They can access our files, they can access our documents, they can encrypt files, they can do anything they want, really. So we want to be able to take that power away from them. And as an example here, if I find my PowerShell ringfencing policy, and these policies are all out of the box. You can just add them in here. You can create your own. But I've got one here that says PowerShell is allowed to run, but it's not allowed access to any of my files. Now, I could limit access to certain file types. I could say it's allowed access to certain folders, but by default, it's not allowed access to any of my protected files under my storage system. And it's not allowed to access the internet. That stops it downloading payloads, uploading data. So it makes it much harder to launch the attack. But even if it does launch the attack, it can't see any of my important data. It can't crypto lock on my file servers or my documents folder because it's restricted access. So if I do try and launch PowerShell, and I do try and go on, so I'm going to go onto google.com, you can see that that was denied. And in my policy, I did have exceptions. It's very easy to add exceptions. I'll show you that now. So if I did try and go to api.threatlocker.com, that you can see that's accepted. And in the audit here, we can see everything that's happening. So we can see that google.com was ring fenced. If we wanted to permit PowerShell to be able to talk to a Google or our RMM server or Office 365, we could just do that, single click, 60 seconds, it's done. But if realistically, there should only be a handful of servers here. There's other applications as well that really never need to talk to the internet that are often exploited. Run DLL, WMI, RegServe is been used endless times to deliver fileless attacks. So that by combining these policies, we can really harden our system beyond just saying what can and can't run. And even down to the file system level, that integrates quite nicely with our storage control component, where you can actually define policies around storage devices as well. But before we go into that, I think we have a question there, Michael, from someone.
Yep. So the question is from Alan Miller. Since your examples have a lot of PS ring fencing, are there any ways to allow it to run with IT source scripts used for management, signing of the scripts, etc.?
Okay, so there's two parts to that question. So first of all, the whitelisting itself is going to stop scripts running without the ring fencing. So the ring fencing is going to stop PowerShell downloading those scripts from the internet. So in that case, we're going to say, okay, I'm only going to allow PowerShell to download my scripts from this server. And you can put your RMM in there, or you can put whatever location you're in there. The next part of this is the scripts that are allowed to run, those PS1 scripts. With the whitelisting, you can say allow only scripts signed by this vendor or signed by my IT department. And if you're using self-signed certs as well, you can use the private key on those self-signed certs to allow that from a whitelisting perspective. So the next part of this is where it really goes into the storage. And this is a kind of squash down demo as well, in that I could literally spend 3 or 4 hours talking about this and send everybody to sleep. So if people do have questions afterwards and would like to get into more detailed questions, feel free to reach out and we'll set up a dedicated call. So the first thing about the storage part of this is, if you didn't gather already, we like to log a lot of data. We like to store hundreds of terabytes of data in data centers just because it's fun. And that doesn't stop with our storage. So if you have our storage component enabled, any of your monitored file systems, any of your file shares, your external USB drives are going to be logged. So I'm just going to make sure I have my policy set up right, because I always forget to delete these ones. There you go, we can delete that. So the first thing is, if I go onto my file server, so I've got a little fake file server here, and I create a document. So I'll create test 1, 2, 3, 4, and I edit that document, save it. copy it to an external drive, or try to. It should get denied if I got that right. It's going to get denied. And just, even if I'm in admin, I can't override that. Delete that file, move that file. Whatever I do with that file is logged in the audit in real time. So if I go into here and I say, I want to know what happened with that file, I can see the full history of that file. I can see who opened it, the computer they opened it on, the program they used to open it. So is this just an AV scanning it, or is it an actual user opening it or reading it with an application? So I can see I actually opened this, read this with Explorer. I then read it with Notepad. I then wrote to it using Notepad. I tried to copy it to an external drive. It was a SCSI drive. If it was USB, it showed it was USB, the serial number of the drive, whether the drive is encrypted, the size of the file, and everything is logged here within a moment. And then I deleted the file and the program I used to delete it. This is really, really useful. If you've got remote users especially, you can not only see what, if they're copying things from external drives, you can see that, whether they're sitting in Starbucks, sitting at home, or sitting in the office, you can see that within a minute. If their computer isn't online, it's going to log that data when they come back online, so you can see what they're up to when they're at the office with their files and what devices they're accessing. Then, of course, the audit is lovely, it's great, but what's really cool is the ability to create really granular policies and what we can do on these storage devices. So first of all, we've got the ability to simple policies like blocking USB drives. So I have a policy here to deny read and write access to any USB drives for any computer in the workstations group. It just says the interface is workstation. We can look at conditions like, is it encrypted, what users, what programs. We can set expiration dates on it and file types and everything. But in this case, I've just blocked USB drives, and I've also blocked other external drives here with another policy. So if I did try and copy something to a USB, it's going to get denied. And this technically isn't a USB drive because I'm on a Hyper-V machine. It gets denied. As a user, I can just hit request permission. As an administrator, I can put my credentials in straight away. But if I hit request there, the administrator can say, oh, this user wants a USB drive. I'm going to permit this based on its serial number for every computer in this group. So it's the IT or the departmental drive where they store their PowerPoint. So I'm going to allow that to be copied. I can permit that. And you can see what it did is it actually created a policy to allow that drive. And within 60 seconds, I can just go in and open that drive. Now, that's just one example of this. I can get much, much more granular than that. So I could say, actually, this is a digital camera, and I don't want people to be able to write to it. I only want them to be able to read, and I only want them to be able to read JPEG files. And I can simply click add there. I can say whether the drive's encrypted or not for certain users or groups, for certain programs. So maybe if you've got a backup server and you've got backup USB drives, you should only allow your backup software to access that drive, not every application. So the user can't browse to it, but they can access it. So if I go into here, within 60 seconds, see how impatient I am? See, here, wait a bit longer. The user shouldn't be able to access any text files on here. They can't copy them off here, simply because it's blocked, but they can access JPEG files. So you're really locking this down to the minimum need that they need that device for. This is really useful for a few reasons. One is if you're a police department and you've got body cameras, but you only want the body cameras to be accessed by serial number and by the body camera software. If you're running a backup and you only want to access your backup drive to stop ransomware accessing your backup drive, you can restrict that to certain applications. If you're, and even if you're, and this isn't just USB drives or local drives, this also applies to network shares. So for example, here I have a network share policy that says, allow read and write access to these shares, but only allow it from these applications. So we talked about the ring fencing before, where we can say only don't allow applications to access our file shares, and that would automatically include this. But we can also do it from the other side, where we say don't allow any application except this list to access our file share. So if I was to go onto my file share and I was to try and open a document, I can open it in Notepad because that's on my list of trusted apps here. But if I try and use Notepad++, even though it's on my whitelist and the application can open, it cannot access that data, which means it can't encrypt that data. It can't, PowerShell won't be able to access that data. Encryption tools won't be able to. There's a lot of flexibility there.
While you're in that, Dan, it's quite a common question. It's like, how do we know what programs to allow? If you want to show the auto-populate.
So when you're learning, you can just click the auto-populate and it'll tell you a list of everything that's actually accessed to your files in the last week for you. So you can do that.
Yeah, so you're not trying to figure out what tries to access it. You can just remove the ones you don't want and then leave it. We have a question from Drew here. Any plans to release an iPhone Android app for requests?
Yes, and it will be. We're actually working with our development team this morning on speccing that out. So it's probably going to be Q2 at this point. But yes, there'll be an iPhone app released first and an Android probably within 6 weeks of that. So it will happen, not just for requests, but also for the ability to do dual factor authentication. We also have added in the last build, the build that went out this week, the ability to do that via text message as well. So in the meantime, if you do want to send requests to an SMS, you can approve them straight from the SMS. So now
we have one other question.
Go ahead.
From Alan Miller, is there a lot of performance impact on low spec PCs? If we have a bunch of i3 PCs with hard drives, should I be looking at making the new i5 and SSD?
So our demo computers that we have, my machine here is a Hyper-V VM image, but our demo computers we have in our main office are all i3s running. Well, some of them have been upgraded to SSD, but they were magnetic disks up until about a year ago, and they're starting to swap them out now to SSDs. There really isn't much of an impact. The biggest impact you're going to see is during the initial deployment, we're going to scan the hard drive. So it's going to be equivalent to an AV doing a full scan of the disk. No one's ever complained that their PC went slow during that time. Obviously, on a solid state disk, it's very, very quick. On a magnetic, it can take longer. If there is outside of that, it uses about 10% of an antivirus in terms of resources and performance impact. Most of the time, you're going to see your CPU sitting at 0%. The biggest resource we use is memory. We expect to use a couple of 100 megabytes of memory. And the reason for that is because we load everything into RAM, so it's very, very quick to process. We're not processing directly from the disk at any point in time. So that's where the solid state versus the magnetic is going to make very little difference, because we process everything in RAM, so it's very, very quick. I think we have another one in there.
I do, yeah. So Scott's asked, sorry if this was asked, how do we research, investigate to make sure an application should be permitted? Our concern is our techs just start approving willy-nilly.
So you can do a few different things here. So first of all, we're not really trying to give advice on what is good or bad, and we try and stay out of opinions, and whether TeamViewer or Dropbox should be used is really none of our business. But what we can do is help you in a few different ways. You can set different levels of permissions on tech, so they can only approve certain things for certain devices and are limited to certain computers. And absolutely, your tech should be aware that when they approve something, they need to be checking the source of it, especially if it's not showing as a built-in app. You can also, when you're in here, quite often you'll see as well an option to validate something against VirusTotal. In that case, you can send off to VirusTotal and you can check against the various different antiviruses and if there's any previous reputation. Now, that said, just because something's good, it doesn't mean it should be ran. You really need to ask yourself and teach your techs and train your techs, and we will help you with that as well. We do weekly training on when you're permitting something. Where did you get the file from? Is this expected? Is it required to run my business? And they're the three questions. It is important that techs, the idea is we're taking control away from a user who probably shouldn't be making decisions, full stop, and passing them on to a tech who is more educated and able to make these decisions of whether I can run this new software or not. Did I download this from HP, or did I download it from some free driver site that guarantees to speed up my computer? The tech should be asking those questions, and it is important that your techs know what they're asking. It's also worth noting we don't bypass your antivirus. So just because we permit something, it doesn't mean your antivirus is excluded from the equation. So if you have an antivirus, you still have that extra level of protection. And that's why we'd never recommend you turn off an antivirus, because it does give you that extra level of protection when one of your techs accidentally permits it. We also have audits of everything that is permitted by the techs. Okay. The only other thing on the storage side I was going to add before we jump into some of the things for Windows 7 is another common way we see this used is quite often if you have a requirement to encrypt files on USB drives, you can say integrate with BitLocker and make sure drives are encrypted. If you're a hospital or you're healthcare and you have a HIPAA requirement, you can do that, and you can set policies there.
We do have one more question, Dan. Drew's asked, any plans to add a note field for request? I find myself forwarding many requests back to users and asking what it's for. So that's a yes.
Yes, and it's an imminent, it's one of the more priority features. So it's most likely going to happen in the next quarter, well, within Q1 this year, probably earlier side of that too. So what we haven't decided is if it's going to be mandatory or not yet. So because if users don't click, if they just hit send anyway, it makes no difference. Okay, so I wanted to get through this, and if anyone has any questions or thinks of any questions, feel free to ask while we jump into the next part of this, because obviously there's a pretty serious topic today, which is Windows 7 is end of life. And well, our opinion is, certainly my opinion as a security professional, is you should not be running operating systems that are not patched and are not serviced by the vendor, period. There are still a lot of Windows 7 computers out there, and we do want to make sure we can do what we can to harden those environments and reduce our surface area of attack. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what you can be doing to secure your Windows 7 environment above and beyond not patching it anymore. So the first thing is, obviously a lot of what we've talked about here is going to harden your environment regardless, and you should be doing those things. The locking down your applications with the whitelisting to make sure nothing that isn't trusted can run is going to massively reduce your surface area of attack and massively reduce your risk of malware. In 2017, when WannaCry was pushed out, because we run at the kernel, our whitelisting blocked that, even for machines that weren't patched. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't patch your machine, because you absolutely should, but we did manage to block that with the whitelisting. So using the whitelisting is a very important step in hardening any environment, especially a Windows 7 environment, given the current climate. The same applies to the ring fencing we talked about, but I'm going to get a bit more into them. But what I really want to focus on is how we want to think about this and how we want to protect Windows 7 environments. So when we're dealing with vulnerabilities in operating systems, typically, in most cases, vulnerabilities are not 0 day. So what happens is Microsoft releases a patch, then the world finds out about the bug. Now, there might be people in the world who know about it, maybe the NSA beforehand, but most of the bad guys don't know about the bug. And that's why patching is so important, because the moment Microsoft released that patch, all those hackers in dark rooms are going to get into their closets and they're going to start figuring out what that patch fixes, and then they're going to reverse engineer that, and they're going to create an exploit for that vulnerability. Typically, there are a few different areas where vulnerabilities apply, or certainly can be opened up, the more serious ones. One is through an interface. So if you have a port open on your computer, an SMB port, that is going to allow an attacker to exploit that vulnerability. So, and this isn't necessarily a ThreatLocker thing, it is a general recommendation. If possible, as well, Windows 7, there really shouldn't be any reason. Make sure you've got a firewall enabled on your computer. Make sure that people cannot connect to the open ports, because the moment Microsoft start releasing SMB patches, which is inevitable, it's going to happen within the next month or 2 or 3, people are going to reverse engineer those attackers. If they can't get through the firewall, those vulnerabilities are less relevant. The next area of attack, which is probably the more common ones that we're seeing used, is the user interaction with web browsers and with the internet. So if you're running Windows 7, if you can, block Internet Explorer. You can do that. We have a bunch of policies which are being added today and tomorrow, and we have a whole bunch of engineers testing this and coming up with more Windows 7 policies to harden your environment. And you can go into here and you can look at the suggested policies for Windows 7 lockdown. And one of those policies is going to be block Internet Explorer. Please don't add all those Windows 7 policies without understanding what they do. So create a policy to block Internet Explorer. If your users do not need Internet Explorer, just simply come in here and say, block Internet Explorer, or use one of our suggested policies to block it. You can see the built-in app here. You can just simply say, there you go, Internet Explorer is not allowed to run. simple as that. Then nobody will be able to open it. The reason this is important is one of the most vulnerable parts of Windows is Internet Explorer. 2 months ago, there was an exploit that allowed your machines to be encrypted. Frankly, I believe that you shouldn't be running Internet Explorer, period, anyway, but certainly on these Windows 7 machines, block it. If you cannot block it, which is a good chance that you can't, take some extra steps to ring fence it. And what I mean by that, so if you have an application, an old HVAC system or a banking system that says, we need to use Internet Explorer for that, enable a ring fencing policy around Internet Explorer to say, only allow Internet Explorer to access the following sites on the internet. So you can put in stars here. So if you can put in IP addresses and you can put in the domain names, put the ports in and say, okay, the user can run it, but they can only run it to access this website. This is really important because it means you're taking away that risk of attack of a user going on a site, having something embedded into it and creating that vulnerability. Removing that vulnerability. Not only should you limit what it can access on the internet, but you should always limit access what your file system can access. In most cases, Internet Explorer does not need to access your file system. It does not need to access your network shares, and it doesn't need to access any protected folders. I'm going to show you how to add additional protected folders beyond just network shares in a moment as well. So go into here and say, do not let Internet Explorer access any of my protected files. That means it can't access your network shares. It can't access your documents. So if it is compromised, it cannot access those things. The other thing you can do is set a policy to stop it interacting with other applications. In most cases, people are setting this ring fencing policy to stop it calling PowerShell, to stop it calling Redshift and C-script and things like that. But in the case of Windows 7, we'd go one step further and say, block it interacting with any other applications, period. So it cannot access Office, it cannot access anything. Unless you find there's an application that needs to be on this list, don't add it to the list and then add things in. We're going to add a suggestion that allows you to run Internet Explorer. Our engineers are currently testing a number of policies and we'll be adding that in, but it doesn't allow it to open any third-party apps, any plugins, anything like that. So, but it allows Internet Explorer to run with all the components required to run it and launch a web page. So please go in there. That is a very important policy if you're going to continue to use Windows 7. And frankly, not a bad policy. The next thing is, obviously, if you're blocking Internet Explorer, you may need to make sure it's another browser. So choose a browser that is patched, is current, is secure, whether it's Edge Beta or Chrome or Firefox. Just make sure it's a browser that you're comfortable is being patched and managed, and permit that browser on those PCs as an alternative. The next thing you should be doing is looking at what other applications your users open that can access documents. So if they're obviously Office is probably one of the key ones. And this one you can only limit to a certain extent. So typically in the enterprise world, we recommend that you ring fence Office and don't let it open any dangerous apps like PowerShell, like Redshift. Again, you can go through that extra step here where you can actually say, on these more vulnerable machines, I'm going to go one step further and I'm not going to let it open any other applications except the ones I permit. Now, there is a caveat to this. If you do that and you have custom print dialogues, they're going to have to be permitted. So you might have to go through the application list and make sure you add all those print lists as well. If you can go in and restrict it, making changes to your registry, that's another way of hardening your system. Even if you allow it to access right to everything except the startup folders and the run folders, they're really useful as well. Again, if you can't do it on a denial, do it on the basis that we're going to stop it accessing scheduled tasks and PowerShell and things like that. And again, restrict Office's access to the internet as well. That's not a bad idea. Quite often, a lot of these exploits in Office that use macros are downloading payloads from the internet. It's not the easiest thing in the world to restrict Office access to the internet, although it's not that hard either. You need to make sure you don't forget about your mail servers, your Salesforce or HubSpot plugins and things like that that are going to be running in Office, and you make sure you add those domains in. Easiest thing is put it in. When you see something getting denied in the unified audit, just add that into the exception. It really won't take that long. It will be a little bit painful, but realistically, you're probably going to add 10, 15 servers in there at most, and then you're going to be set up and Office is going to be hardened. Don't just look at Office, Adobe Reader. Don't forget any other PDF reader you use. Make sure that they're actually being locked down and that their internet access is being restricted where it can be, and their file access is being restricted where it can be. One of the things that's actually, and again, these aren't necessarily bad things on all browsers and all operating systems, but they're getting much. Another one is Google Chrome. So we have a policy here to ring fence Chrome, although it's not complete. We'll be adding this in. If you can't really restrict Chrome access to the internet. Well, you can do it to certain ports, but what you can do is you can restrict its access to your files. So if you've got any browsers that users are opening, well, obviously Chrome is still going to be a patched browser. It may use components in Windows that could be vulnerable. Restrict those browsers to not be able to access your file system. So I'm happily using Chrome here. It's ring fenced, so the only type of file it can access on my protected file system is a PDF file. So if I try to open this text document in Google Chrome, which I can find out how to do that. I don't even know where chrome.exe is on this machine because I installed it in the data folder. Apparently they're going to make it extremely difficult for me to find it. You can see that it's not able to open that text file. This is really important because it means if it can't access my data, it can't steal it and it can't encrypt it. Now, I am using Chrome as my PDF reader, so I added a star.pdf to allow it to open PDF files only. So again, anything that's accessing the public internet, to make sure you lock it down as hard as you can so it cannot access things it doesn't need to. So I said I use Chrome as my PDF reader, so I did allow that as well. The other thing that's absolutely worth doing is there are a whole bunch of Windows processes. We're currently adding these in. We already have the standard ones for things like PowerShell and Redshift and C-script, and WMI is a heavily exploited process. Print Spoiler is another one we're adding in as a Windows 7 lockdown. Make sure these Windows processes, because these are the things that are going to be vulnerable from patches, cannot access your data. Go into those applications and add the Windows 7 processes and say simply, or Windows processes in general. Again, these aren't bad things to do on Windows 10 either. So whether it be WMI, or I'm sure I've got one in here, WMI, we can go into these, make sure these processes cannot access the internet. If they can't access the internet, they can't download payloads, they can't upload your data. Make sure they can't access your file system. So if they try and access your file system, don't allow them to do it. There is very little reason for these applications to legitimately access your file system or your documents. Even PowerShell, unless you're doing some kind of backup script, there's probably no reason for it to access your documents. Lock them down, and then your surface area of attack is massively reduced. I'm trying to think of the other ones that are really useful. And we're going to be adding suggested policies in here. They're all going to be turned off when you add them, because some of these are going to be really aggressive. You're going to see these appear over the next few days. So go to add suggested policies, pick Windows 7 lockdown, and pick the policies there. There's going to be policies like block Internet Explorer, ring fence Internet Explorer, and you can choose which one's more relevant for you. So do look through those, because we're going to add Print Spoiler in there. We're going to add all of these processes that run in the background and make sure they cannot access your files and not access your the internet, and where possible, not access the registry. So please keep an eye out for those.
I think it's quite a common approach from ThreatLocker to be paranoid, but when it comes to Windows 7, extra paranoia is definitely a good thing. It will be heavily targeted.
Now, it's worth noting as well, the world isn't going to end today. While support officially ends today, we're pretty confident in saying this, and we'll know for certain in 9 minutes. Microsoft is still going to release one more round of patches for Windows 7 today. So this will be the last patching day of Windows 7. So the threats are going to get worse probably over the future weeks, more likely months, because patches are generally only released on Patch Tuesday, which is today.
Yeah, the last patch that was released was Patch Tuesday of December. There hasn't been a single security update since then. And with 2008 server, I believe that's actually extended to the 20th of January. They share a lot of patches with Windows 7, so it's highly likely that we'll see Windows 7 patches today.
So one other area I'm going to touch on is the storage control. So we talked a lot about locking down access to your files. By default, by ring fencing something so it cannot access your files, it will not be able to see any file shares. in addition to that, you can audit any other folder on your computer and lock that down from being changed. If you go onto into a storage policy and create any policy or just edit any policy. So I've created one called Audit My Assets here. I've simply said permit read and write access to these files as well. We can use local files on the C drive as well. They are now, or even though I've only got a permit policy, they are automatically protected by ring fencing. So I've put a policy in place to monitor my host file, so nothing can open my host file that's ring fenced. My documents folder, my downloads folder, anything you think is appropriate on your C drive that may have sensitive data or may be attacked is great ways to protect it. Your startup folders, they're all very useful things to put in there. So is there any other questions from anyone or? No, I think.
We do have one, Alan Miller. Can you ballpark pricing? Obviously varies by scale, but is it per endpoint, monthly, dollar no-brainer-ish?
It's a difficult question because I'm not sure if this is a managed service provider or enterprise, but to give you an indication, it does most antiviruses or security products, what you'd expect.
Alan, we'll get a sales representative to set up a call with you and they can discuss that with you directly. I think it's probably going to be the easier one than that one.
Yeah. And I lost it. And it appears as though the time is...
Oh, you just cut off there for a second, Danny.
Yeah, so the time, it appears as though a good time for the end because my internet seems to be having problems. So, and we're coming up on the hour. So if anyone, we are going to publish pre-recorded this. So if you did fall asleep because I was boring you halfway through and you want to go back to see what I said, I will send you on the link for the recording. If you do have questions, just reach out to us directly, book a call. At any point, you can go on our website, you can book a full demo. You can also go onto our Calendly page. If you're already a ThreatLocker customer and you just want help doing an audit review on a Windows 7 lockdown, or you want help deployment or demo, you can go to calendly.com/ThreatLocker and book a call with a salesperson, a tech, or an audit review is going to be a tech, a full demo if you have a longer series of questions and you want a full demo for all the people in your organization. So feel free to do that if you have would like to get more information. Okay. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you everybody for joining us. And we hope everyone has a good day and stay secure. Oh, and
thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.